I really hope and pray that you had a fantastic Thanksgiving. I have to say that I really missed you guys last Sunday. My name is Warren, by the way, if you're wondering who I am. And I am the city engagement pastor here at City Church. Josh, our lead pastor, and his family, they're out with their family this weekend and just enjoying some time for Thanksgiving. And so just pray for them as they're away, that they have a time of just rest and that they have a safe trip coming back to us. But last week I had the opportunity to go to Florida and to visit a supporting church that has supported our family being here in Griffin, Georgia, and it was great just to report back what God is doing here at City Church in Griffin. But we also got to spend time with family in Savannah for Thanksgiving. How many of you had 2 Thanksgiving meals? Where's my 2 Thanksgiving meal people at? Do we have any of those? So we started the morning at my parents' house, and we had lunch, and then we went to my wife's parents' house, and we had dinner. So I ate too much. The first lunch was the traditional Thanksgiving lunch, and then dinner, we had hamburgers, hot dogs, and chili, and I was okay with that for sure. So we had a different kind of Thanksgiving dinner tonight, but we enjoyed that time. And so I pray and hope that you enjoyed whatever you were doing, whether you're home, whether you're friends or family, that you had a fantastic Thanksgiving, just focusing on what God has done in your life and what He has given you. I hope and pray that you can think and know that you can be thankful. Today, if you're new with us or if you weren't a part of our City Talk, today will kind of look a little different as far as teaching goes and what we're presenting today. If you were here about a month and a half ago on a Sunday night, we did something called a City Talk. And our City Talks really exist for this. They exist so that people will become informed, so that we're willing to invest. Because a lot of times we don't want to invest in things, right, if we are not informed in things. And so back in the spring of last year, we talked about race and we talked about diversity. And that was an incredible time just to look at our community and to hear from different perspectives here on stage. And then about a month and a half ago, we did a City Talk and we talked about poverty. And so as we move into the Christmas season, we really kind of felt it was important to kind of come back to this. And here's why. If you've been with us the last couple Sundays, we've talked about this idea for Christmas called 40 for Oars. And so Oars Elementary is a school right here in our backyard. It's literally right here by Home Depot. You could almost just walk there in a few minutes. And it's an incredible school that we've had the opportunity to partner with. Even before we launched service here, we've been with them for about a year and almost a half now, and we've had the opportunity to help put up bulletin boards. We've had the opportunity to feed teachers. We've had the opportunity to be a part of events and serve ice cream and serve popcorn. We have washed jackets from Lost and Found from them, and they've been able to give those jackets to kids in need. We've just had so many opportunities to plug into Oars, and so we were beginning to pray about, God, what would you want us to do here in the city of Griffin when it comes to Christmas time, just to give back to this community and to use the resources that we have as a church to love well and to just place resources in this community. And so God led us to this idea of 40 for Oars. And so when you hear the number 40, maybe you have this question, and we'll come back to this as we close this morning. When we talk about 40 for Oars, here's our heart, that we would be able to place 40 mentors in one school. And so the Spalding County school system, there's about 10,000 students here in Spalding County from elementary to high school. And currently there's about 40 mentors for the entire school system. And so we just thought about, God, what would it look like if we just doubled this number in one school? And we put 40 mentors. So maybe you're asking, what does a mentor look like? A mentor is someone who takes an hour a week and goes and hangs out with a student. So that's taking an hour of your week, your lunchtime, coming in the morning, coming before school's over, and during the school hour, just hanging out with one kid for the duration of the school year and investing in them and pouring into them. Statistically, they say that about 1 out of every 3 to 4 kids don't have any kind of mentor in their life. And so it's something that these kids need. They need someone to pour into them, to watch over them, to walk through life with them. And I'll share some stories later about the mentee, the young little man that I have, who we've had incredible conversations. You're going to be blown away of some of the things that I've heard. But just to sit with him, to laugh, and to listen. And so 40 for Oars is 40 mentors. And then 40 for Oars is also just to step into Oars Elementary. As we talk about poverty today, this is a big part, that they have students who are on free lunch all week. And so they qualify for free lunch based on the income of their families. And so every day they come to school, they, in most cases, have free breakfast and they have free lunch. And the thing is, though, those kids go home on the weekends and they don't have that same resource. And so there's a great organization here in Spalding County called Spalding Collaborative, and they have initiative called Backpack Food for Kids. And what Backpack Food for Kids does is they pack these bags, they deliver them to the schools, and those kids on the free meal program, as many as they can, they pack these bags for them so the kids have food for the weekend. The food has sausage, Chef Boyardee, it has Pop-Tarts, granola bars, it has a Yoo-Hoo, it has juice, and so it's something to help sustain them through the weekend. I've had the opportunity to hang out at Oars a lot, and Greg is on the janitorial staff there, and he's a great guy. He comes to City Church some, and he says every Monday, it doesn't fail. He said, I have a kid come up to me, and you can tell that they didn't eat pretty much all weekend. He said they're starving. They need food. And so currently, this program, Backpack Food for Kids, is not in Oars Elementary. And so we just began to pray, God, what would it look like for us to step into Oars and do 40 mentors and feed 40 kids? And so December the 15th, here in 3 weeks, our entire offering will go to Backpack Food for Kids to start a program at Oars Elementary. Every penny, every dollar that comes in will go straight to that. It won't stay here, it'll go, because we believe that we're called to be for the city, and so one of the ways that we do that is we take what's given here and it goes back into the city. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. I want to take you this morning, though, as we walk through and talk about 44s, I think it's important for us to know what it is that we're investing in, and really it kind of comes down to this, understanding poverty. And so when you hear the word poverty, I want you to ask this question to yourself. When you hear the word poverty, what comes to mind? What is the one word, as you think about this, when I say poverty, what is the one word that comes to your mind? Take just a second, think about that. That one word, as you think about poverty, what is the one word that comes to your mind? So maybe for some of you, the word might be children. Maybe the first thing that you think of when you think about poverty, you think about children. Maybe for you, the word just comes to mind of lack of resources, lack of food, lack of finances. Maybe for you, the word that comes through your mind is housing, education. Maybe for you, it's just the lack of necessities. The truth and reality is that we all have some preconceived idea of what poverty really is. This past summer, I had the opportunity to spend 2 days here locally in Griffin and go to a thing called Poverty Institute. And Poverty Institute was a 2-day conference that was led by a lady named Dr. Beagle. And she grew up in poverty and then also raised kids in poverty and then found her way out of poverty. And so she runs this Poverty Institute and really just allows people to become informed, because a lot of times we're misinformed of what poverty really is. And so for 2 days, I had the opportunity to hear, to do activities. We actually got to go into the community. So one of the days they set us up as a family group and they said, hey, here's your budget, here's what you have coming in, and now you need to find out how to make the rest of your meals work. And so we had to go to a food bank and figure out how to get food and what the process looked like and how it worked. And we had to make a budget and we had to plan meals. And it began to make me understand that my idea of poverty was very blurred, that I really had no clue what was going on with someone who struggled in poverty. And so our hope is this, is by the time we step away, that we understand what poverty is, but more than importantly, we understand how we step into it as a church when we talk about being for Jesus, for all people, and for the city. So there's 3 ways that we all know about poverty. And one of those, of course, is that you've lived it. So the truth and reality is that in this room, you have possibly lived it, or you could possibly be living in it now. And I want to say this, that we're so thankful that you're here. We don't think that you're any different than any of us. We're glad that you're here, that you're a part of City Church, whether you're new today or whether this has been home. Thank you. But maybe you've lived it. Maybe you have been living in it now. Maybe you know someone. Maybe you have a family relative. Maybe you have a friend who's living in poverty and you know their struggle. And so that's how we learn. But most likely, the reality is this, is that many have learned about poverty from media. You've learned about what poverty is from media, right? Whether it's news, whether it's a movie. Have you ever watched a movie before and it was wrapped around poverty? It was wrapped around someone maybe being homeless or someone who's been through something, and it shapes our mind to where we begin to think about poverty in certain ways. And so these are the 3 ways that have shaped our mind. So I want you for a second think about those 3 things and which one of those has really shaped your mindset. I have to be honest with you, one of those that has shaped it most for me is that I would say it would be media. And then I would also say that I knew someone. My dad's a pastor and has been a pastor for 40 years, and there's a lot of times that we spent time in people's homes and being with them, and we got to see situations, and it shaped my mind for poverty. Here's the thing that we have to know, all right? 13.5% of the U.S. population lives in poverty. 13.5% of the U.S. population lives in poverty. That's 43.1 million Americans. So 43 million Americans here in the United States live in poverty. Now, what is really crazy about that statistic is that 14.5 million of those are children. So 14.5 million children here in the United States live in poverty. And this is kind of what began to blow my mind about what poverty is this next piece. The federal government defined poverty as the annual income of $25,000 for a family of four. So when we think about this line, when we think about this $25,000 for a family of four, and I don't need you to raise your hand, I don't need you to lift it up, but can we just be honest and say that to raise a family of four on $25,000 would be very difficult? I mean, it would be very hard. And some of you, you're living this life right now. This is something that you're trying to do. And this has been defined. Here's the crazy part. This has been the definitive line, the poverty line, since the 1960s. So since the 1960s, nothing has changed when it comes to poverty. They have kept that number the same. Now, let me ask you a question. Did a Coke cost the same in the 60s as it does now? Does a loaf of bread cost the same now as it did in the 60s? Did anyone's grandfather ever talk about the time they'd go down to the corner store and they'd get a hot dog for a nickel? Right? Because here's the thing, it's changed. Everything has moved except for what? This line. And so when we think about poverty, I think we think that there's this number that we have in our head, but the truth and reality is this number has never changed since the 1960s. And so the same family of four that was buying a gallon of milk for way cheaper is still trying to buy a gallon of milk and still trying to pay rent prices that have increased in the same picture of the 60s as they are now. According to the Department of Agriculture, it cost a parent about $13,000 a year to raise a child. Now, some of you would be like, that's really high. But if you're paying for health insurance, if you're paying for all those pieces, $13,000 a year can quickly come to fruition. It can quickly become a piece that we can think about and we can hold to. The poverty line is $25,000 for a family of four. That's 2 kids, and you're already over that poverty limit. 19.7% of U.S. children live in families with incomes below the federal poverty line. So 19% of these kids actually are even below this line of $25,000. And so what does it do? It begins to shape and redirect our thought process of what we think poverty is. It helps us begin to understand a little bit that maybe we don't really have a true grasp and a true understanding. And can I be honest with you? When I went through the poverty, I was blown away. I had no clue. I was like, I'm way off on this. Because what do? We have these preconceived ideas, these preconceived notions. MIT, a college, did a study and found that the average livable wage for a family of four in Georgia, so right here in Georgia, a family of four, they did a study, the livable wage for a family of four is $60,000 a year. Livable wage. Broken down, the numbers are staggering. If you look at this family, let's do 1 adult and 3 children, here's what it would look like per hour. So per hour, the living wage is $34.72. So if we took the number that they came up with, this is the living wage for a family of four, you would have to make $34.72 an hour to make a living wage in the state of Georgia. The poverty wage is $12.07. The minimum wage is $7.25. And so I think a lot of times we have this idea, well, they just need to get a job. There's plenty of minimum wage jobs that exist in our community, but can we just pause for a minute and say that maybe we're wrong? Because the minimum wage is not meeting what the standard is just for someone to make it even to the poverty line. And here's what's wild, because I think a lot of times we think those that are in poverty, they're just not working. They don't have a job. 2/3 of people in poverty work 1.7 jobs and still can't afford to pay rent. So that's not the situation. They're working, right? They're doing their best to make things work, but the way things are set up, it's a struggle to make ends meet. I think this will shatter that idea when it comes to poverty, where our solution to someone would be, there are jobs, they just need to work. Well, yeah, there is, but maybe we say this, we just need to teach them to fish. You teach them to fish, right? If I can teach someone to fish, then they'll have plenty to eat off of. But what if there's not enough fish in the pond? What if there's not enough resources in the pond? And so that doesn't always hold true, because according to what we've just seen, there's something that's missing. So what about someone who's getting assistance, you may ask? You say, well, they are, but they're getting assistance, right? And This is also staggering. Temporary assistance for needy families has an average amount of $478 a month for a family of 3. So you can apply for temporary assistance, and you can get $478 a month for a family of 3. Now, here's another thing that hasn't shifted a whole lot. The previous program, called Aid to Families with Dependent Children, was the predecessor program from 1935 to 1996. So before temporary assistance, there was this program that existed in the states. And this program, over 20 years ago, the average for a family of 3 was $408. So how much did that increase over that time period? $70 a month. So do you see where we're missing? Something's missing somewhere. Aid to Families with Dependent Children had an 82% receiver of funds for those who qualified. So the previous program, 82% of people who actually applied received funds. Today, temporary assistance for needy families, 23% receive funds. So we've gone from 80% to 20% receiving funds. So again, we're missing something. Something is missing. In a book called How Are Welfare Families Doing?, it's estimated that almost 70% of those families who made this transition are now in poverty. So in the transition from the aid to families to temporary assistance, 70% of those families now, they're saying, are in poverty because of that transition. 46 million people in America suffer from food insecurity. I think a lot of times we have, and I'll be honest, we have this idea that hunger only exists in countries that aren't called America. That we have to travel somewhere to find people who are struggling with hunger. We have to go overseas, but the reality is this, it's right here in our backyards. It's here, it exists. There are people who are hungry. There are people who have needs. And so it's here. We don't have to go anywhere. There are people here in this community who have food insecurity, who struggle for a meal. 1/3 experience chronic hunger. And then you say, well, don't they have help? But food stamps are $1.89 per meal. So $1.89 per meal. A study was done that took several family meal bloggers. How many people love the meal bloggers? Do we have any people like that? Anybody? No? Okay. Everybody's like, no, I do my own thing, or I go to Chick-fil-A. So food stamps give $1.89 per meal, and there was a study done and it took several family meal bloggers. So you can go to these blogs and you can see what their budget looks like. You can see what their meal plan looks like, and the cost per person per meal was set up. The highest per person per meal, I don't know what they were eating, was $8.30 per meal. That's pretty high. They must be eating like organic, grass-fed meats and like all that stuff, but $8.30 per meal that was the highest. The average was $5, so the average of all the groups together, brought together, the average was $5. The lowest average per person per meal was $2.77. That is a gap of almost $1, and for a family of 4, that's about $100 a month. When we talk about those that may be receiving assistance. So again, this shatters our idea that, hey, this has got to be the way they're doing this. This has to be the way it's made up. But the truth and reality is, let's try to think for a moment that maybe we're wrong. Maybe we are missing that there's a gap. So our idea of everyone has everything they need, especially if they have assistance, it's misplaced. And so when we think about these numbers, when we think about these statistics, I think the question that we have to answer is, what causes this? What are the things that cause poverty? So the first thing is this, is generational poverty. Their life outlook is this, is that life happens to me and I don't have any control over it. Griffin has probably one of the highest pieces and parts when it comes to, when you look at the different kinds of poverty, Griffin probably has in this category the biggest, generational poverty. So that means that I'm in Griffin, I'm a grandparent, I went through poverty. My child grew up in poverty, and now they're in poverty. And then my grandchild grew up in poverty, and now they're in poverty. Now my great-grandchild, when I was doing the Poverty Institute, I went to one of the food banks, and I was just talking to a lady who was in her 80s, and we were having a conversation, and she talked about how all the way down to her grandkids, they were all still in the same house. She was there to get food for her family. It was a generational thing. It was something that had followed them, and it's all they know. They usually work the land and rarely own it. They don't know people who benefit from education. They don't know people who moved up in their job. They're highly mobile. In other words, they're always ready to move. When their rent's not paid, they're ready to go. When the light bills, those things, they're highly mobile and able to move quickly. They're limited in literacy, and they focus on making it through the day. So someone who's in generational poverty, their goal is just to get through the day. Their goal is just to make it from Monday to Tuesday, from Tuesday to Wednesday, from Wednesday to Thursday, and to deal with each crisis each day of the time. There's also working class poverty. Their life outlook is, I have some control over my life, but not very much. They are one crisis away from going backwards. And this is one that maybe can fall, and one that maybe we understand a little bit. They live paycheck to paycheck, not enough for extras. And so every paycheck, they spend it because they have to, on bills, on necessities. Then the next paycheck comes in. What do you have to do? You have to spend it because necessity, and there's very little room for extras. They don't usually own property. They budget weekly or 1 month at a time. And this is one that, again, maybe we can understand. So there's generational poverty. There's working class poverty. There's also situational poverty. Life outlook is that I pull myself out of poverty. If I did it, anyone can. You just have to make better choices, work harder, and make sacrifices. These are people who usually have grown up, who are educated and able to earn a living, but they are, again, one crisis away. In many cases, this is just a situation came into their life, and it placed them so heavy and deep that it placed them into poverty. And a lot of times we do see where people in situation of poverty are able to make it out, but again, are one crisis away from being pulled back in. And lastly, we have immigrant poverty. I have the power to make, this is their life outlook, I have the power to make a better life for me and my family. They usually have little to no resources. So they're coming fresh, right? They have coming from another country. They have little to no resources. Their language and culture barriers, and they don't understand the social norms or behaviors. And so they're struggling to put one foot in the front of the other because of just the shift in culture. So these are the 4 types of poverty. These are the things that lead to generational, working class, situational, and immigrant. So how do we impact? So the ultimate goal is that we would be informed, so that we would be able to invest, so that we would make impact. And so hopefully as you receive this information, just like me, you think, okay, my mindset, my thought is way off. And so when we hear these things, what do we do? Because here's the thing we have to understand. How do we make impact? How do we step into this type of situation? So this morning, we thought we would bring Cora back. Cora, if you'll join me up here. There she is. Y'all welcome Cora as she comes up here. So Cora is locally here from Griffin, and she is currently a city commissioner. Just got reelected, right? Yes, just got reelected. Congratulations.
God, pray for me.
Pray for you?
Yes, pray for me.
Yeah, we can do that. So she just got reelected this past month,
Yes.
right? And this is your second term?
No, this is my
Do it. What you got?
4th.
Wow, 4th term.
Yes.
Awesome. And you are in which district?
I am a District 2 City Commissioner, so that is basically, well, I have the most weird-shaped district for the city. It covers the east side of Griffin, Chapel, Tinsley, comes in and it picks up the historic downtown area. It goes down Broad Street, goes by Food Depot, kind of curves back around by the Salvation Army. And it kind of goes down by the cemetery.
Okay.
So some of y'all live in my district. It doesn't matter what side of town you live on, you still live in my
You
district.
have the potential to be in Cora's. I've learned that. I just moved to Griffin in June, and we just actually moved into Griffin, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, we're in Griffin. They're like, no, you're in the county. You're not in the city of Griffin. So I'm
Yeah.
learning all those weird lines and those weird things. So I just kind of want to begin, and I kind of spoiled a little bit. But the reason we asked Cora to come is because not only did she grow up in poverty, but also you kind of are in situations in your district where you do deal with some of the poverty.
I do.
And specifically, you actually grew up here in Griffin. So I just answered that question, but can you give us a little more where you grew up and your little tidbits of
Yes.
Griffin?
Okay, so my family is from Griffin. We got a lot of information on the screen this morning, so I'll try to walk you guys through it from my perspective so it's a little more human. I am a person who did not come from generational poverty. My family is from Griffin. They have been in Griffin forever. Griffin via Pike County, for any of my people who stay
Okay.
here. They made it here from Pike County, moved to the big city. My experience was situational poverty. And because of that, I have lived everywhere in Griffin. My parents suffered from substance abuse, both of them, different drugs of choice, but nevertheless, that was the experience. And so where neither my mom or my dad grew up in poverty, they made decisions that landed our family in poverty. So technically, I would be considered like first generation poverty. I'm not someone, my grandparents were business owners in the city of Griffin at a time when black families did not own businesses. And as I have stated before, my mom used to always say, "Oh, we were poor when we were growing up," and I'm like, "You weren't poor. You were just black. That's why you were excluded from things." But like, they owned businesses, they went on vacations, they had a car, they had a camera. So my family was not poor. But for me, the poverty experience started as early as a child. On paper, it probably went into about elementary school. But maybe as we talk, you'll see that where we draw the line about poverty has ended does not necessarily end the poverty experience. It's not as black and white as, oh, yesterday you were poor because you didn't have any money, but today you have a lot of money, so you're no longer in poverty. A lot of it is the mindset that's attached to the experience. And one of the things that you said earlier, I think if we can think of poverty more as an experience, and not something, an isolated incident that comes along and then it's easily filed away. It weighs on the person who's in it. It weighs on the family around them. It weighs on the children that grow up. And so even though I have now gotten myself out of poverty, because by adulthood I was no longer in poverty, I still carry that mindset of living the poverty experience. And I'll share this with you guys just so you can understand. I have so many clothes at my house, so many clothes. And I used to think I was a hoarder. Like, okay, I'm like a low-key hoarder. I don't want to get rid of stuff. But what I realized is I'm so fearful of having to rebuy something that I've already spent money on once that I'll just keep it forever. Because in my mind, why would you reuse a resource when you already have something? So I'll have a black shirt, and I'll say, oh, I haven't worn this shirt in 2 years. I should just get rid of it. Someone else could use it. But then I say, but if I get rid of it, I'm just going to have to buy a black shirt again, and that's going to be another $15, and I already have one. So I have all these clothes, not because I wear them, not because I think they're nice, but in my mind, there's a scarcity of resources. And you don't give stuff away that you might have to go back and repurchase. And I have a good job. I own a house. I have a car. So I'm not actually lacking for resources, but there's a disconnect between what my brain knows in terms of how I can manage my resources and what my heart remembers about not having resources.
Yeah, and that's important to note. So one of the things that we didn't discuss is you're also a therapist.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah.
Oh, and because of the poverty experience, I have a lot of jobs, right? Because I always want to have more money coming in. So, yes, a therapist as well.
Which I think is so important, too, because you talk about in that situation that poverty not only, we think poverty just shapes our wallet, but the reality is poverty, one of the biggest things that poverty leads to is depression.
Oh, absolutely.
And it shapes our mind, and so that's important to know.
Yeah.
So thinking about, you just kind of answered that question, but thinking about that concept of mindset of poverty, at what point did you realize or begin to understand that you guys were in poverty?
Okay, so I realized I was in poverty when I was an adult. Certainly not as a child, and I think that's important to know. One of the things that you said earlier was the ways that we learn about poverty. So we either live it, we know someone, or from the media. And I would challenge most of you to challenge your own thought process about whether or not you know someone in poverty, because I can assure you that you do. Poverty does not look like poverty all the time. So it is the young lady that works at the grocery store who's very nice to you, and you guys have a good rapport when you come in, but you don't understand that she's living in poverty, but she's working. Or it may be your coworker who comes to work dressed nicely, does everything right and looks appropriate, but is struggling financially and is barely making it. So the process of being in poverty and going through that experience, it really does shape how you experience the world, and it makes it be it feels very othering. And so no one wants to walk up to you and say, hey, I'm the impoverished person. And a lot of times you're living in a community where you have similar situations as your neighbors. So you base your poverty or your poorness on the people in your neighborhood or on your street or in your family. You don't base it on the people on TV or the people whose families have Mercedes and they go on 4 or 5 vacations. You look at your neighbor and you say, well, their lights got cut off last month and ours didn't, so we must not be that poor. We're not them. And so for me, I didn't realize how poor we were until I became an adult and I had to start paying bills. And I was like, ooh, this is kind of rough. I understood then intimately, having to go to work every day, having to save my resources, having to put them together, how difficult it must have been for my parents in that situation. And so a lot of times I can't stress that enough. Like, we look at people and say, why don't they know that this is their situation? You base your life off of the people that you're around. And so I tell everybody this, even if you live in Peachtree City, which is generally accepted to be a nice area, I'm sure there are people in Peachtree City who feel poor because they don't have the houses that the richest people in Peachtree City have. So it's relative. We would probably take the poorest house in Peachtree City and say, like, I'd live there. Of course, who don't want to live in Peachtree City? But for the person in that experience who's saying, well, I only have 1 car and they have 4, or my kid is in public school, their kids are in private school, they feel poor. It happens the same way in neighborhoods and communities that are struggling financially. So we, and I say we because I'm not a they. Even though, again, I have money now, I'm not poor, I'm still part of it. I don't want a label that says I'm poor. So I'm not walking around my neighborhood saying, oh man, this is the poverty neighborhood. We're all in poverty over here. This is great. I'm just walking around trying to be normal like everybody else and not feel less than or not feel like the statistic. Or not feel like people have pity on me because, oh, look at the poor little kid who doesn't have anything. So I didn't know that I was poor. I knew that sometimes we didn't have food, or I knew that when it was Christmas not to go asking for $700 toys because I knew there was just no way that it was going to happen. But I still asked for toys because I was a kid. I still expected certain things because I was a child, but I didn't remove myself from the human experience because I was having a poverty experience.
So one of the things that we talked about last time we were together, we talked about the fact that sometimes people say that people in poverty put themselves there. Mm-hmm. And you talked about, your response to that, which I love. I'll let you do that. And you answered that a little bit because you said poor is relative. But I love even hearing the story of the neighbor that paid rent for 50 years. Because we talk about, we think people put themselves there, but the reality is different than that.
Okay, so try to see how I can explain this very quickly. Again, like I said, challenge yourself about what you think about poverty, because I'm not going to walk out of here today, I can assure you, and decide that I want to be poor tomorrow. It's just not going to happen. It's not a good experience. I don't want to do it, and I doubt very seriously that any of you will do the same thing when we leave here today and say, like, man, today would be a good day to be poor. Let me see how this is going to work out. So the idea that someone makes a conscious decision to be impoverished or to struggle is almost asinine. Like, nobody would voluntarily place themselves in that situation. What happens often is you are a victim of circumstance. And I don't want to say victim in the way, again, that we feel pity or feel bad for them, but you become impoverished because you got laid off from your job that you've been at for 10 years and now you no longer have benefits. You become impoverished because someone in your family is terminally ill and you have to make a decision between life-saving medication or the rent. And it sounds really easy to say, well, bills are priority, but so is your sick grandma who really, really needs that medicine. So is your sick kid who really, really needs that medicine. So my mom has neighbors. They are late 90s, really nice. You know, they're old. And they have been living in their home for 50 years. They seem relatively comfortable. They certainly aren't people of means and excess, but they've been there for 50 years. The wife recently died, and the husband is now having to move because he is unable to afford the rent on his own. So a few months ago, when his wife was alive and they were a two-income elderly family, they were okay. Now that he is a one-income elderly individual, he's poor.
They'd been paying rent for
50 years.
at that home.
They have paid the mortgage off at least twice. They could have bought a house, but they never had the resources to purchase, and they were comfortable. So a lot of times, as you spoke about earlier, you don't have this vision of being able to get out of it, but you do have the vision of being able to maintain within inside of it.
It kind of becomes the norm of just how you experience life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for you guys, what was the step towards you guys kind of coming out of poverty as a family?
Okay. It was not a conscious decision on my parents' behalf. My grandparents took my parents to court and petitioned them for custody, and were actually able to prove that my parents were that derelict, that the court gave them full custody and completely removed my parents' rights. My parents then still did not immediately jump up and make changes. They were addicts, so it's not like you have a bad thing happen and, oh, tomorrow I'll be different. But I would say that that was the catalyst in my family. Is basically my parents had a very emotionally traumatic experience, and through a long process, ended up in rehab, ended up going through the process. But this is why I say to you about the experience. So I was 10 when my parents got clean, and on paper had ended the poverty experience. My mom got a job. She actually had 2 jobs. My dad was working. We were living with my grandmother, so we now had stable housing. We now had stable food. But we were still poor. And my mom on her own was not financially stable. My mom on her own was not house secure or food secure. So even though on paper it ended then, we were still very poor. We still didn't have anything. My mom was able to finally purchase a house, a very small, quaint house in a rough part of the city, when I was 17. So when I was born, my parents owned a house. So at that point, they were doing good. They lost their house because of the drug abuse. And because of the way they defaulted on the loan and some other bad decisions they made, their credit got messed up. So literally almost for the entirety of my life, neither my mom nor my dad owned a home. We always lived with someone else. So I would say that my mom got out of poverty. It probably took her from the decision to get a job, no longer be on drugs and no longer abuse substances. It probably took her 6 or 7 years to not be impoverished, to be able to sustain as an individual on her own without the assistance of someone else.
Yeah. I thought it was neat, too. Last time we talked about the fact that your mom's situation even showed up later in her life when she was trying to get her nursing certificate and all that stuff, that they still went back tons of years, all the way back to her experience with drug abuse, and she had to explain all those situations. And so even that part of poverty, like we said, that experience, it carries with us. So let me ask you this question. We talked about last time, what would you tell someone today who wants to know how to help those in poverty? And so we really talked about the fact that, and we're entering Christmas time, right? And we talked about the fact that we have a young child, and we want to give them Christmas, and we want to give them gifts, which is great, and those are good things. but we again see that child when they're 16, 17, 18, and we're like, what happened? Why are they still the same? Why didn't they change? Can you kind of expound on that a little bit for us?
Yes, okay. I'll kind of tie this back into the example that you just provided of the long-range poverty experience. Even when things look like they're going right, it still pops up later in life. Like as he was saying, my mom went and got, she was already college educated. She went and got an additional degree. She got better jobs, like definitely was upwardly mobile, financially stable, all of that. She graduated with an RN degree, had a job secured and everything. But when she got ready to get licensed by the state, she had to account for every legal decision that she had ever been a part of, which included the entire time that she was poor and on drugs. And so once, I don't know how many of you remember where Bi-Lo used to be, the grocery store in the shopping center. My mom went to jail for shoplifting a jar of apple juice and a dozen of eggs because we did not have any food at home because we were poor. So when she is now clean, she's graduated from college, she's ready to go be a nurse, the state of Georgia wants to know why she went to jail for stealing apple juice and eggs. And she had to account for every other transgression that had happened. So when we talk about children in this experience and we say, well, they should be good now, there are long-term consequences that rear their head way beyond when we could expect. And so the idea that if we just simply give kids something, or if we just simply tell them how it should be, that should be enough to change their mind about how they conduct themselves or about how they live, it just requires so much more of an investment than simply saying to them, here's something that should make you feel better. You shouldn't want to be poor anymore, and you'll start making better decisions. What happens is we feel really bad for 5-year-olds who don't get anything. So we lavish them with things because, oh my goodness, look at this sweet little 5-year-old who deserves to have nice things. We still kind of feel bad for them when they're 12. But something happens and one day they're 16 or 17, or now they're 18 or 19, and we have different expectations for them because they're grown. Yeah. They should know better. Even though this is just still the same little 5-year-old who we had to help, and it's the same 12-year-old. So the answer to me about how we kind of affect poverty from that is it's not just us giving, it's us being present. And not just providing the conversation to them, or not just simply saying to them, here's a nice toy for you for Christmas. This should make up for everything. It is being consistently present and showing them that there are other things or that there are other ways, because it changes the expectations of the poverty experience as opposed to changing that day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. One of the cool things you said last time is that a lot of times we're willing to give kids crayons.
Yes.
But we don't want to teach them to color.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's it. Is it makes us feel better when we give people stuff. I feel good because I did something nice for someone, but we make a lot of assumptions about how what we do for other people affects them. And we say, if I did something good and I intended it for good, I know when it landed, it was good. And we often don't really think about what else may be lacking. The family that is impoverished, those aren't bad parents, but they are stressed out. They are broke. They are struggling. They're trying to figure out how to pay rent and put groceries on the table. You know what they're not doing is worrying about coloring. But that's an experience that all of us feel like all children should be able to have crayons and a coloring book and have somebody color with them. But I can assure you that somebody that is in the throes of poverty, they have a lot of other life or death stuff to worry about than sometimes being able to ensure that they're providing their children with enriching experiences because they're just trying to make sure there's a roof over their kid's head. So when we think about helping someone and saying, well, I gave them a coloring book and crayons because I know this is something that all kids should have. Unless somebody sits at home with them and says, go get your crayons and coloring book, who's going to color with them? There's nobody. So you gave it to them, but who's going to help them use it?
Can we tell Core thank you so much for sharing with us?
Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes. So I've enjoyed the opportunity to get to know Core over the last couple months, doing city talk, sitting it down, and walking through these things with her. And we appreciate what you're doing in our community. And hopefully we continue just to have this relationship and just continue to see what we can do. So when we think about our community, let me just kind of wrap us up here. And I share statistics not because it's the statistics that matter, but the statistics help us point to a person. And I think that sometimes we look at this situation and we see it as a problem, but the reality is it's a person. When we talk about poverty, it's not a problem, it's a person. There's a face, there's a name. There's someone who needs relationship. There's someone who needs us to know who they are, to sit with them. In 2017 in Spalding County, 26% of the population lives in poverty. So we live in a community that is heavily impoverished, one of the greatest poverty counties in the state of Georgia. In Spalding, 14% of those are adults and 32% of those are children. So in Spalding County, if you were to go to a school, 1 out of every 3 kids is struggling in poverty. In Spalding, 20% of those in poverty, they live below the poverty line. So that line that was set at $25,000, 22% of those here in Spalding County live below that. And so the question that we have to do, and the reason that we brought Core in, the reason that we talk about these statistics, is because we have to say, what do we do? Like, because I don't know about you, but when I first heard these things, there was this weight that just kind of sat. And you're like, okay, what am I supposed to do? How do we step into this? What does it look like? And so I want to walk us through just very quickly what Jesus did for us and how that translates to what we do for others. See, at City Church, our heart is to believe in every person's God-given potential. Every person has God-given potential no matter where they are, no matter where they are in the socioeconomic class, no matter race, no matter who they are. Every person has God-given potential, and we believe that we are called to see that value in who they are. Because while they were created by God. So the thing that we carry in common, and Core talked about, is we're human. You and I, we were created the same way. We exist the same way because of who God is, and so he sees us all as his. I should see every person that I come in contact with just the same way. Jesus meets us where we are, no matter race, no matter socioeconomic class, and it's our desire to do the same, to meet people right where they are. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9, it says, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. So it's talking about, here's Jesus' grace, here's him giving something that we don't deserve, that though he was rich, yet for our sake, for your sake, for mine, he became poor so that you by his poverty might become rich. In other words, it says this, that Jesus was willing to sacrifice so that we would have. See, poverty comes to an end when those not in it become friends with those in it. See, poverty begins to look a little different when those that are not in poverty become friends with those who are in poverty. Because here's what Jesus did. He came to earth. What did he do? He humbled himself, and he became in human form so that we may have this relationship. He humbled himself. He sat down at the table. Because here, statistically, they say this, that almost 100% of the time, you sit at the table with someone who is like you. So when you're having dinner, when you're at the workplace, wherever you may be, for the most part, almost 100% of the time, you are sitting with people who are like you. And so our hope as a church is that we shatter that we sit at the dinner table with anyone and everyone, no matter their background, no matter their status, no matter their past, whatever it may be, that we sit down and we have this in common, that we were created by God and we have value. It says this in Philippians chapter 2, verse 4, let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. Can we think about this passage just for a moment? And we enter a season, let's just be honest, as we get into Christmas, and I'll be real and honest with you, it's easy just to think about the interest that we have. We just had Black Friday, right? It's one of the busiest and the most money spent of any day in the entire year on one day in America. And usually what are we doing? We're looking out for what? Our own interest. We're looking out for what we want. But this is what Scripture teaches us. It says, let us look out not only for our interest, so it is important, right? We do take care of ourselves, but also to the interest of others. The fact that this says this next passage says mind, that we have a choice, teaches us that we have this decision. Because verse 5 through 6 says, have this mind among yourselves. So this is a conscious choice to look out for others' interests. It's a mind thing. It's a decision. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, and so he comes to us as God, he did not count equality with God as a thing to be grasped. And so Jesus comes to earth, and what does he do? He comes in the form of God, but what does he do? He does not count that equality with God. He comes to us just as we are. He struggles. He's tempted just like we are. He's faced with the decision of sin just like we are. He feels pain and sorrow just like we do. It's accounted in Scripture that one of his friends dies, and it says that Jesus wept, and so he had all the feelings, all the things that we possess, and he did not equate that equality with God while he was here on this earth. So he put everything aside so that he may build relationships, so that he may walk and push us to this relationship with God. So we have this opportunity to make the same choice Jesus made. Jesus surrendered his privilege to position himself to love all people. Jesus surrendered his position, his place of privilege, so that he may move himself to love all people. For Philippians chapter 2, verse 7 through 8, and this is the continued part of this, and this is the end of this, but he emptied himself. He emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Can I just pause for a minute? And may you know this today, that Jesus did this for you. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter your past, present, future, no matter who you are, Jesus did this for you. He set himself aside, and he gave his life for you. And I think that if we could take that picture for a moment, and if we're here this morning, and maybe you don't know Jesus, and that's okay, we're glad you're here, but if you're here this morning and you know Jesus, and we say, you know what, I want to have the same mind of Christ, then that same mind of Christ is this picture that we have right here in Philippians, that we would surrender, that we would sacrifice, that we would turn over. You see, we can love others more when we release the grip of status and empty ourselves to serve others. That when I sit down at a table, it doesn't matter what I make, it doesn't matter my background, it doesn't matter my education, but when I sit down at a table with someone, I can surrender myself, and I can say, you know what? We're human. We both have value because of how God created us. We've both been loved by the same God, and we can walk through life together. And so what does that look like for City Church? What is the steps that we can take here at City Church? What are the things that we can do and we can begin to step into so that we can love the person no matter who they are, no matter their background? And so, again, as we've prayed through this Christmas season, that we talked about what we could do, we've talked about this to have 40 for Orrs. So if you weren't with us in the beginning, we talked about how Orrs Elementary School is right here in our backyard. And at Orrs, it's almost about 50% of kids who are struggling in poverty. And so we said, what would it look like to sit down with a kid once a week and build a relationship and be a mentor? And so we want to put 40 mentors in Orrs Elementary. I just got the opportunity to start my mentorship and to walk with a kid each week. And my first week with him, we sat down at the table and he begins to tell me stories. And I was like, I'm not sure how this conversation is going to go, but can I tell you the truth? I literally probably said about 5 sentences and the kid talked for an hour. He just wanted somebody to listen. He wanted to sit down with someone and just know that they were present. And he had some stories to tell about squirrels and possums in his backyard and about how him and his brothers tried to catch them. And at the end of that time, we created this secret handshake. I said, let's create a secret handshake. He said, oh, okay. And so we create this secret handshake, and we get out in the hallway, and I'm taking his class, and his whole class is in the hall, entire class. And he's like, his eyes get real big, and I'm like, uh-oh, what's about to happen? He goes, can we do our secret handshake? And I'm like, well, I mean, it's going to defeat the purpose of secret a little bit, but I was like, this is it. This is the moment that he wants to know that he has a buddy, that he has someone who genuinely cares. And so what we did right there in front of his entire class is we did our secret. I'm not going to show it to you. We did our secret handshake. You can't know it. And the joy in that moment was found just because I was present. I'll be honest with you, I didn't do anything special. I just showed up. I sat with him. We laughed. I listened. Because at the bottom of every situation, the reality and the truth is it's a face. It's a person. And so we hope and pray that we can take and put 40 mentors in Orrs Elementary. You say, what does it look like to mentor? So mentor it's a big jump, I'll be honest with you. There's training that we will do here again in the beginning of January. It's an hour and a half. It's actually not bad. It's actually a lot of fun. And then there's a few other things that you do, and then we plug you into Orrs Elementary. And so what they ask of us is they ask that you show up once a week during school hours for 45 minutes to an hour, and you hang out with a kid. So the school starts at 8, they end around 2:50, and so you have that time. And you say, Warren, I can't do that. Because of my job, the way I travel, and that's okay, we understand that. We know that not every person can take this time, but if you're able to, we ask that you just pray and say, you know what, I would love the opportunity to invest into a person, into a child. And in most situations, we are receiving students who are going through poverty, students who are day-to-day dealing with crisis at home. And so it's an opportunity for us just to sit down and just to have a listening ear. And so when you leave today, at the back tables out here, there's 3 round tables, and there's a mentor sign-up sheet on each one of those. And so if you're interested in being a mentor, we'd love for you to sign up. We had 25 people get trained this last month to be mentors, so we're 15 away from putting 40 mentors in Orrs. Isn't that awesome? That's so awesome. I'll be available after service. I'll be out there, so if you have any questions about mentorship, I'd love to answer that. And then the last thing is this. That 40 for Orrs also means that we want to supply a need. Because the reality is that some of these kids are just hungry. And so there's a great organization called Spalding Collaborative right here in our community, and they have a program called Backpack Food for Kids. And this program sends food to kids who have free lunch all week. They're receiving free lunch based on their income all week. And then during the weekend, these kids don't have food to go home. And so this organization takes these bags of food, they fill them, so you can also be a part of that. Each week they fill these bags and then they deliver them to the schools, and those kids have food for the weekends. And right now Orrs Elementary does not have this program at all, so no kids at Orrs are receiving Backpack Food for Kid meals on the weekend. So we just said, what would it look like for us to put 40 mentors in and to just start feeding 40 kids at Orrs? And so on December the 15th, every bit of offering money that comes in will go towards Backpack Food for Kids for Orrs, every penny, because we believe it's important to take what God has given us, the resources here, and to give back to what God is doing in the community. And so let me ask you this question as we finish. One person. One. Our heart is that you find one person and you just build a relationship with them. No matter who it is, no matter what their struggle, their background is. Maybe it's that student at Orrs, or maybe it's someone in your neighborhood, maybe it's someone, but build that relationship. See the value in them, that God has created them, that He's made them, that there's purpose in who they are.